Hello, here we are for another coffee break with Kardec, where we discuss some topics from the book Genesis by Allan Kardec. And today we'll be talking about, in my opinion, one of the most interesting aspects that is discussed in this book in detail, which is the Perispirit. So to understand the Perispirit, it is important for us to understand what the spirit is made of, the raw material that composes the Perispirit. So we know we've talked about the fluids, and we know that the fluids, they are the material creation, part of the creation, that God has created the material world through this universal cosmic fluid. Everything in material terms is derived from the universal cosmic fluid, and the spiritual, the intelligent element, which is something apart. So there's this trinity, God, the spirit, and the material universe in different aspects. And we are going to see some of these aspects today, because the Perispirit is basically a product of this material world. So talking about the fluids, we know that the starting point of the fluids is the highest degree of purity. And then on the opposite side, we have the tangible matter, is the other side, which is the most dense form of this fluid. And in between, we have variation, that we could say continuous variation from its highest degree of purity to dense matter. We should remember that in our world, we have an idea what dense matter is. It is composed here, the physical world is composed by the elements we find in our periodic table. So far we have 118 elements. So everything is composed by these elements. And these elements that we find there, they are composed by atomic particles, by neutrons, protons, electrons, which in turn are composed by subatomic particles. But we won't go into detail. Just to remember that in the universe there are denser forms of matter. We have neutron stars, where we have this condensation of neutrons, and it's so dense that gravity there is extremely high. But we don't experience this on Earth. We don't have neutron stars here on Earth. So just to give an idea that when we talk about the material world, we should think about Earth, but also should think about all other celestial bodies that exist that we are learning about, and the manifestation just on a physical level. So let alone the manifestation of the universal cosmic fluid in the spiritual world. So this fluid, it undergoes innumerable transformation. So as I said, from one extreme, the highest purity, to dense matter, we have so many variations, transformation of this fluid. I just want to call an attention to draw a parallel to what we know here in the material world. We know there's just one single substance. For instance, let's take water. If we take water in its three main forms, in vapor, liquid, and solid form, ice, we see that just one substance, water, is capable of undergoing transformation and presenting different characteristics. And reading an article the other day, scientists have found around 11 different ways that ice can form. That means that the water molecules, they can arrange themselves in different ways. And according to the ways they arrange themselves, they give this ice certain properties. Just the way the molecules arrange themselves in space is enough to attribute different properties to the same substance. Can we imagine when we take this to the universal cosmic fluid, and the derivation of these universal cosmic fluids. And also it's important to remember that in the material world we have the periodic table with its elements, but the properties of the substances, and then molecules, and then the bodies that these molecules are going to compose, they are so many, so different. We can't say that if I group certain atoms, I'll have that kind of property. They are just atoms. But then, when we arrange them in certain ways, they have different properties. And these properties only can only be seen when they have this configuration. So the beauty is there. We have 118 elements. We have four major forces that guide the arrangement of these elements here in the physical world. And yet we can create so many different substances with so many different properties. We see, for instance, graphite, the leads we have in the pencil, and diamond. They are the very same thing in terms of composition. Carbon atoms. Arrange them in different ways, they have completely different properties. So just one single atom can imagine when we start to arrange things in different ways. And we see that from the periodic table, over 4.5 billion years, we have here on Earth such a variety of living beings. And this is just a tiny part on the material level of what we can have. Through evolution, we'll see many more different beings being formed in different ways, the ways they adapt themselves to the external conditions. So all this is possible just at the material level. So it helps us to understand how is it possible that the majority of the universe is composed by a type of matter which is quintessentialized. That means it's a matter that is so subtle that we can detect with our instruments, which are made from material elements. We can't use these instruments to detect this type of matter. The variety of worlds, the variety of substances we may have in the spiritual world. Well, and then going back to perispirits, we see that the perispirit is going to be formed by these substances. I myself had some difficulty at the beginning when I first read about perispirit and the elements, the material elements that compose the spiritual world, to have an idea. I could only think in terms of a water vapor being sort of dense and sparse, but couldn't understand that depending on the arrangement, depending on the properties of these fluids, they could be something completely different. So there is this variety in the spiritual world, even more that we can find here in the physical world. So that helps us to understand a bit more about the perispirits. And when we start to talk about the properties of the perispirits and in detail, and I would say, we wouldn't have enough time in one coffee break if we were to take coffee while studying the perispirits in depth. We would drink so much caffeine that we wouldn't sleep for the rest of our lives. So um, we'll bring that in small bites so that we can have some aspects of the perispirits for our coffee break every now and then, because it's fascinating. So the perispirit, which is the material body, although not dense, but is a material body, it is around the intelligence element. It is around these spiritual elements that is the essence of each one of us. It's like a second body that we all have. So where does it come from? Well, we know, I've mentioned before, they are made out of fluids, but just any fluid in any form, no. Each world, I'm talking about now, for instance, let's borrow the example of our planet here. Planet Earth has a fluidic atmosphere around itself, which is compatible to the type of physical world that we are. So it has a variety of fluids, as I said before, and these fluids, the density of these fluids, they are within a certain range, which is compatible to the level of planet that we are. And when a spirit comes to this world to live here, either in the physical world or in the spiritual world surrounding the planet, it takes the elements that are available on the planet in this spiritual atmosphere, if we can use these words. It will draw the material to compose this perispirit, this spiritual body. We see it with the different names as well, astral body and so on. But Kardec decided to call it perispirit or spiritual body, and this is what we are going to do. So when we come to this world, spirit comes to this world, it's going to draw from it, from the fluids that are already around the planet, what is necessary for it. For instance, we hear from the spirit that in Jupiter, material life is less dense, is less material, as it were, than it is here. So the fluidic atmosphere in Jupiter is much lighter. It's much closer to the original properties of the cosmic fluid than it is here. The fluids are much more dense around our planet Earth here. And if we were to go to Jupiter, we would need to take the fluids that are available in Jupiter to dress ourselves, in inverted commas, with our perispirit. So our perispirit would be composed by the local fluids. And even if we were just to stay in the spiritual atmosphere in Jupiter, if we were to go to another planet, it would be the same thing. Sometimes it's also a bit difficult for us to understand, even in a material level here. And I like to borrow the example of air. Air is something that we don't see. It is material. It's composed basically by nitrogen and oxygen. There are other elements as well, but the majority of our air is made out of nitrogen and oxygen. If we were to take a box, let's think of a box, a paper box, card box, a sort of tea chests, and with a measurement of 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, which makes up 1 cubic meter. So if we were to weigh the amount of air inside on a sea level, because it varies based on the altitude, but at sea level, if we were to weigh the amount of air in a cubic meter, it would weigh 1.22 kilograms. This is the density of air, 1.2 kilograms per square meter, per cubic meter, on sea level. If we were to squeeze air molecules, all these nitrogen and oxygen, squeeze to one side, one tiny corner of this box, it would be just necessary just 0.1% of this cubic meter. 99.9% of the box would be empty, nothing in terms of air. It would just be vacuum. And all this air would be squeezed in 0.1% of this cubic meter. And air is there. We know it's there. We breathe this air. We see the wind. We see the effect of this air moving around. We know the effects of a hurricane, tornado, the just movement of this air. And we know the effect of that. We know the energy it can carry. But yet we can't see it. We don't see air directly. We know it is invisible to us, and it's matter. Can we imagine something that is much lighter in terms of property, much more quintessentialized, subtle than the subtle matter, forms of matter that we have here, like for instance the air. And we have hydrogen, which is the lightest of the elements in our periodic table. And if we were to count the amount of molecules within this cubic meter, the number of molecules, basically nitrogen and oxygen, in this cubic meter of air, we would find 27 followed by 24 zeros. Molecules in 1 cubic meter. It's full of molecules, full. 27 plus 24 zeros after that. It's a huge number, squeezed in a tiny corner that represents 0.1% of this whole volume. So we see that the effect of the material world is something that has been created because matter is combined and arranging in from the atomic level to the level that we can perceive things. And that's why some people say, well, this world is a sort of is not as solid as it seems, it represents. And then the perispirit of the fluidic body, it is also a condensation of the original cosmic fluid around this, what we call focal point, just as much as the corporeal or physical body. They are made out of the same material, the same original material, which is the universal cosmic fluid, but they underwent different processes. And when we come to the physical world, we spirits, we bring with us our spiritual body, the perispirit, and it's there together, spirit, perispirit, and physical body. When we die, we just leave the physical body, which will decompose, return to the physical world, and we go back to the spiritual world, or to exist just as a spirit with its perispirit around it. So physical body and perispirit, they are this. They have the same primitive element, universal cosmic fluid, but they are different byproducts. It's not just like having water, vapor, and ice, or liquid and ice at the same time together there. They are just different condensations of the same material, raw material. And as I said, it depends on the worlds that we are. And also, within worlds, there are gradations of these fluids in terms of density. And which one are we going to take? Well, it depends how evolved we are. It depends on this vibration that we have around ourselves, which is actually who we are in spiritual terms. If we are more evolved in spiritual terms, our vibrations will be much higher. And the type of density we are going to draw closer to ourselves to compose our perispirit are the highest we can get in that particular world. And if we are not that evolved, our fluids can be so dense, but so dense that some spirits, a great number of spirits, they die, they discarnate, but they still think, their perception is so close to the material one that they think they are still alive, that they have to mind their earthly concerns. And we know of spirits wandering around who haven't yet realized they are in spiritual world. They are no longer in the material world. But type of fluids around themselves, the density of the perispirit is so high that the impression they get is that they are still alive. Well, in another opportunity, we'll study the properties of the perispirit and what the perispirit in fact represents for this, the spirit itself. And there are so many other interesting aspects that we can talk about. Even the role of the perispirit in mediumistic communication, mediumship. So the perispirit is very important, especially when we talk about this interaction with the material world. That's what I had for today for our coffee break with Kardec, and I hope to see you in our next coffee break with Kardec. Thank you.